If you are talking to a 3-year-old and you point at something, the 3-year-old will not look at what you're pointing at. The 3-year-old will look at your finger. Same with a dog. Will look at your finger, won't look at the thing you're pointing at. And that is the problem faced by every spiritual teacher. You, I, we don't look at the thing being pointed at because it's not look-at-able. It is beyond our sensory abilities. So instead what we do is we look at the pointer instead of what's being pointed at. Now, in the Old Testament, the Jews were told, when you build me an altar, don't carve the stones. Just take natural stone and stack it up and build me an altar. Don't make it fancy. Don't carve the stones. Well, why not? Because if they carve the stones, then pretty soon they are focusing on the pointer, the altar, instead of what's being pointed at. So don't be carving the stones. So the other problem is then that the stones carved allow the human to pull down from an immaterial space a material notion, something that you can see and touch and smell. Well, what the spiritual master is pointing at doesn't exist in that space of seeing and touching and smelling. So the same thing is true of the name of God. According to the Jews, only one person, once a year, in one place only, would speak the name of God. And if it's written down, it's a little Y symbol, and then it's a little V symbol, and then it's an H symbol. What I don't know is whether the little vowel markers were ever included with that YVH. But when the Jews are reading the Old Testament and they come across that word, they don't say it. They say Adonai, which has got nothing to do with YVH. Adonai simply means Lord. So, Romanized Christians pronounced it Jehovah, and a little more educated ones realized the Jews didn't have a J sound, so they say Yahweh. But the Jews didn't pronounce it. Well, why wouldn't you pronounce the name of God? Because, again, you're pulling down into the material world a non-material thing. You are, okay, and if you then look at Michelangelo painting the Sistine Chapel, and there's God and Adam up there touching fingers. Michelangelo was making solid a thing that is not solid, which is very misleading to us. Big mistake. So it's important that we stay away from, not get focused on the pointer, but instead try to be open to what's being pointed at. Now, there's kind of an irony in that thing about the name of God, because the Jews decided, because I don't know that it's ever written down anywhere, I don't think it's a commandment anywhere, the Jews decided that if the name of God, this YVH, was written, then you never destroyed that. And if you had to, I guess you burned it. But to the best of your ability, you don't destroy it. So all right. So what I think about 200 years after King David, you've got King Josiah, who thinks that they need to refurbish the temple. So he sends some carpenters down there to fix up the temple. And back in the lumber room, they find all of these old manuscripts that got stuffed back there because they had the name of God on them. And in these 200 years, the Jews had lost track of the Torah. They weren't paying attention to anything the Torah had to say. Well, that was very disappointing to King Josiah. He tore his clothes and cried and made everybody shape up and start paying attention to what was in these writings that were back there in the lumber room. So there's an interesting problem there in that they had preserved the pointer, but it did them some good in that it kept that heritage alive. All right, now let's jump over to taking a look at the mandala, which are those beautiful colored sand paintings done by Tibetan Buddhists that after they've spent days creating this beautiful geometric colored sand painting, they let the wind blow it away. It's gone. Perfect, because the spiritual exercise is in the creating of the painting. To save the painting would mislead you into thinking that by grasping the pointer that you understood what was being pointed at. Now maybe, what if the command had been, if you build me an altar and you carve the stones, have the carving of the stones be a spiritual exercise. Then after you've made your sacrifice, destroy the stones that you've carved. I can see that would be of value spiritually. Now, what about comparing the creating of a mandala with its ultimate demise being the wind blowing it away? Compare that to raising children, that you put everything that you know how to do into raising the children. The children are a spiritual exercise. And then when you're done, it doesn't do you a value to get too attached to the outcome of that exercise. You can't hang on to your notion of what those kids should be. You were pointing where those kids should go. You cannot get attached to the pointing. They're gone. Let the mandala be blown in the wind. Well, I love you.